right, we're recording now.
Great. Okay. Dan, why don't you start? You've been with us a couple times before. If you could briefly introduce yourself, tell us your party affiliation, the district that you're running for, briefly describe the geography of the district, and then tell us about yourself.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. My name's Dan Lashover. We're running for state representative in District 26. I'm a Republican seeking the nomination. The district begins in Wilsonville, the southern end, where it's always sunny, of course. It runs north through Sherwood, captures King City on the east side, the fast-growing push from Tigard and Beaverton. The north end, we've got a little push over Highway 26 into South Hillsboro, covering Centennial High School. And then on the west side, we've got the Aloha area and more rural countryside. You know, if you drive through our district, it's residential mixed with small and medium businesses, a few large ones. But you also find, of course, the agricultural side of it. You know, we have very rich, fertile farmland in the southwest corner along the Tualatin River. And the ubiquitous hazelnuts, of course, are a signature for the district. In terms of my background, by way of introduction, I'm a 20-year, roughly, Wilsonville resident. I'm a father of 2 adult children, raised in Oregon, educated in public schools here. I'm a 36-year long husband. And in terms of professional background, I've worked in finance my whole career. I started out in my early days, actually, as a general contractor in residential construction. When the economy crashed, I went to school and I earned a finance degree at Arizona State University, went on to get an MBA at Northwestern. From there, I joined a large manufacturing company working internationally in finance, in various senior level positions. I spent about 3 years in Canada, 5 years in Europe, before I left the company and returned to Oregon. So I returned here to raise my young children, but it's not the same place it was when I came here 20 years ago. So I'm running to bring some sense of balance to the legislative body, to provide, be an advocate for transparency in terms of budgeting and other functions. And I'm going to actually represent the members of this district, the constituents, as opposed to the current representative who seems clearly aligned with the Portland leadership.
Great. Thank you. Larry, could you introduce yourself?
My name is Larry McDonald. I'm 46 years old. I've lived in Wilsonville since 2012. I have 4 young children, 2 of them school age. So it's a little different being a parent and a teacher. So it's been a hard adjustment, but we're getting there. My education is a Bachelor of Science in Information Technology. The reason why I ran, I was just like Dan was saying, I was just alarmed by the complete disregard for the will of the people, such as passing the cap tax, or cat tax rather, just a year after well over 60% of Oregonians voted it down. Another issue would be the death penalty. They completely gutted it. I don't know if you've had a chance to look at it, but there's no way anyone could be convicted and executed in this state. Not the way they set it up. It's just Courtney, she's a nice lady. I've spoken to her lots of times, but she just does not represent the values of this district. And I couldn't sit by and watch my children's future just evaporate. I had to do something. So that's why I'm running.
Great, thank you. Dan, back to you. You ran, I believe, for this seat in 2018. Is that right?
So yes, in 2018, I ran in the primary.
So we've seen John Wilson had this seat not long ago. Rich Vial had the seat after him. The registration in the district is still very closely balanced. I think Democrats have about a 5-point advantage. And we know there are other seats in Hood River and in Bend where we see people overcome that advantage. Yet Dan, I see that aside from loaning yourself $10,000 or nearly $10,000, you haven't raised a lot of money. Why is that? Why is there not more support for a Republican candidate in this district?
I think there's a couple reasons in terms of the money raised. I've raised about 600 cents. A couple donors have stepped up. The fact is, I joined the race on the very last day to sign up. And when I signed up, the country was just awakening to the idea that the pandemic was going to be worse than we had been led to believe. Within a week, we shut down the state. So I, in good conscience, have not tried to raise money from friends and family. In fact, I just introduced myself to a large group about a week and a half ago, telling them I'm running. So I think it's an unusual situation. I just haven't sought the donations. I think we're going to have to see how that plays out in the next few months over the summer. I know there are people still fundraising, but the traditional methods, the meetings, the gatherings, that just hasn't happened.
Okay. Larry,
I'm just going to finish. I think there's support in the district. When I ran last time, again, it was on a very low budget, very short time frame, and I picked up 30% of the vote.
So Larry mentioned the corporate activities tax and the death penalty as two specific issues that are motivating him. Dan, before we go back to Larry, can you tell us a little bit about specific issues that either the Democrat who holds the seat has taken or things that are motivating you specifically to want to run?
Again, I think the will of the people is extremely important. I had an interview a week and a half ago and one of the questions was, how do you understand? How do you know what the will of the people is? In a full general session, you'll have maybe 3,000 bills introduced. 1,500 of those will be passed. 750 of those will have fake emergency clauses on them. So it's hard to know the will of the people for that many things coming through. But, there's one very good poll we take, and it's called voting. So when you vote on an issue and 7 out of 10 voters in your district say no, or 6 out of 10 in your voters in the district reject the tax, you're not representing the will of them if the first thing you do is enter office and simply agree to vote yes with Portland leadership. What motivates me is also education. It's certainly something I'm keen on given my background. I grew up as the 9th child in a family of 10 children, family of modest means. I started out in community college before I went on to Arizona State. I borrowed and worked my way through college. So I'm very in tune with the fact that education equals opportunity. So for me, education is the number one issue I think the state needs to keep stepping up to. We clearly do not yet have the scores nationally. We've only recently stepped up to the plate on funding. And typically every session we play games with the education budget, leave it till the last minute till we hold it hostage for some other issues. But those are the two main things that drive me at the moment.
So I'm a little confused. You're unhappy with the Democrat in the district, the incumbent, because she voted for the cat tax, but you've just said we need to, and I'm paraphrasing, we need to step up to the plate on funding. The cat tax was specifically designated to fund education. So do you want more money for education or not?
Yeah, number one, it's not entirely dedicated to education. Number two, it's a bad tax. It's a tax on energy. It's going to be a tax on working people. It's a regressive tax. So if we're going to fund it, we should find a better way. There are zero economists that I respect in this country that think a gross receipts tax is a smart way to go. The voters rejected it outright, and yet they implemented it. So it's a fact that there's going to be a lot of the money dedicated to it, but it's not limited to spending on schools. And there's nothing that says they can't go and raise that tax tomorrow and spend it on what they want.
What would have been a better taxing method in your opinion?
I don't have a simple answer for that. We've struggled in this state for years to find a balance. I think that's the important bit, a sustainable income stream. I know the business community stepped up here and said they mostly agreed with the cat tax, but I don't think I don't think people understand the implications of it. I don't think they understand the math of it. You know, if you're a small business and you take in 2% maybe to the bottom line, that's your margin. If you put a gross receipts tax of 2% on the top, you've just taken my whole profit. That's an existential threat. So I don't think people understand yet what they've implemented. I don't expect that half the legislators understand it as well.
Great, thank you. Larry, you mentioned those two issues that got you into this. Could you back up a little bit and tell us about your civic engagement? What have you been involved in your community prior to running for this office?
You know, I was pretty politically inactive. I was just one of those people. I paid attention, sort of. But then when I saw what they were doing, I said, well, wow, they really don't care what we think. So that made me pay attention. Like the cat tax, that's a big one right there.
Yeah.
We voted no on it, well over 60%, and they went behind us and said, we don't care what you think. There are better ways to fund education, and that's not the way to do it. We have the shortest school year in all of the country.
Okay.
And we keep dumping money into it, but yet we're still on an agrarian educational model as opposed to an industrial one. How are you going to teach children what they know when they're only in school 164 days out of 365? The answer is you can't.
Yeah. I came into this late, and maybe this is a rude question, but you appear to be in a car right now. Are you in a vehicle right now?
Yeah. Yes, I just got done with an audit.
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you've had a chance to look at Dan's website or whether you know Dan at all, but I'm wondering if you could help us distinguish between the two of you. Do you see a place where you and Dan disagree, or where you would say, here's something that I'm advocating for or against that is really different from Dan?
No, him and I are on the same page as far as Second Amendment rights, taxation, opposing onerous regulations. We're pro-life. So we're pretty much on the same page when it comes to those major issues.
Okay. How about you, Dan? Places where you would say that that you and Larry are different?
I think the biggest difference is in our backgrounds. You know, the value I bring to this position is my experience in consulting. I've been a consultant for 17 years. I've worked with very large organizations, from General Electric to Pacific Life, Lifetime Television, those kinds of companies. I've been a small business owner, and I'm currently a self-employed consultant, a sole proprietor. So I think that's the big difference. Those are skills that are sorely lacking in Salem: the financial skills, the small business ownership, the large business understanding.
When you are offering your consulting services to businesses now, are you doing sort of balance sheet workouts, or are you doing management consulting? What specifically are you offering to your clients?
I've been in software and finance consulting, so various clients from banks to hospitals, insurance companies. Planning is the primary approach that we deliver. So that for banks, that means planning their balance sheet. For hospitals, that may mean the revenue stream. For manufacturing companies, it's all sorts of things in terms of revenue modeling. But it's primarily systems, finance related, and planning.
So given that you ran in 2018, in your decision, you said you got into the race pretty late this time. I'm wondering if you talked to either party leaders at the county level or at the state level, or whether you're coordinating or getting any help from anybody in the Republican, the party apparatus.
I have spoken with the caucus leadership. Last fall, we spoke a couple times. I would say there's not a lot of help per se. There is caucus, I'm trying to say weekly meetings. You know, they're trying to steer candidates, but there's not a lot of interaction at this point. You know, we're just not having those meetings, the big cattle calls where the candidates come out and meet. So little bit different environment this time around.
How about you, Larry? Did you seek any advice, or do you have anybody who's sort of shepherding you through this process?
Yes, I've got a few people with the Clackamas County Executive Commission that I stay in close, or committee, that I stay in close contact with. Of course, I contacted both of the Tracys and then let them know, as well as Bill Currier, to let them know that I was running.
I noticed you haven't raised much money so far. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I think right now it would be a little bit vampiric to be asking for people for money when 270,000 Oregonians are out of work. It's just hard to know who's unemployed because a lot of people are not going to talk about that on social media.
Right. So how are you getting your message out, or how are you trying to distinguish yourself from Dan? I know you said you agree with him on most things, but you guys are obviously seeking the same nomination. So how are you doing that?
Oh, how am I reaching people? Right now, it's Instagram and Facebook.
Yeah.
I looked this morning. I am approaching 2,000 followers, which is pretty amazing for a local race.
Yeah. I'd like to ask you both now, again, because we are looking for ways to distinguish between the two of you, to ask your opponent a question. Ideally, it's a question and not a statement, and it's on a substantive matter. And the idea here is to help us see how you think or how your opponent responds. So, Larry, I'd like to give you a chance to ask Dan a question first.
Okay, here goes, Dan. What is your opinion on the so-called red flag laws?
Red flag laws. So we're talking about the prior restraint bill that was passed a couple years ago on giving up your firearms if someone challenges you on that. I'm concerned about it undermining the Fourth Amendment. I don't believe it's going to achieve the kinds of things people say it will achieve. You know, we talk about mass shootings in this country, but the red flag law really has no relationship to that whatsoever. It's in place. Many people talk about it being unconstitutional, but in fact, it's not the first form of prior restraint we have in this country. You know, simply being arrested removes your liberties and your rights before you've been accused or convicted of a crime. So I wasn't in favor of it. I don't know that it's going to accomplish the kinds of things people hope it will. And I worry about it across the country. So when there's a mass shooting, we say red flag laws. That was certainly something everybody, the hue and cry goes up. But we're going to have 50 different red flag laws in states if we go that approach. So I don't think it's a cure-all or answer to the problem.
Larry, since you asked the question, you want to follow up on that? You have a view on this? I believe in Oregon, we call it an extreme risk protection order. What's your view on this?
I think it's inherently unconstitutional. It violates several constitutional rights. They make it sound as if you can just go and challenge it in court, but if you don't have thousands of dollars to hire an attorney, which you'll need to challenge it, how are you going to get your rights back?
Have you known people who have been served with one of those orders?
No, not at all.
Okay, so it's philosophical and theoretical at this point.
Correct.
Yeah.
Can I pipe in here and ask both candidates to tell us what current standing member of Congress they look to and they say that's the kind of congressman I want to become?
Okay, I'll go. Probably Kevin McCarthy. He's really stepped up lately.
Okay. Dan?
Did you mean congressmen or did you mean state representatives or senator types here in Oregon?
I guess, pick whatever you want. I'm looking for an elected official who you think, both in terms of his or her politics, but how they comport themselves, represents a paradigm of what you'd like to be,
Sure. I suppose at the congressional level, I did run for the U.S. Senate years ago, of course, and Dan Sullivan from Alaska is somebody I know and respect very much. He's quiet and effective, former military guy.
In the legislature who you look to as a model?
Sorry. Say again.
If there's anybody in Salem who you look to as a model?
Well, I have a lot of respect for my current senator, Kim Thatcher. I think she's pretty effective. She's been a representative and a senator, so that's a good example.
Dan, Larry got to ask you a question. Would you like to ask Larry a question?
Sure. I think the big issue today in the legislative body is how do we get people to work together, avoid walkouts? So what is it that we will bring, or Larry, you will bring as a state representative to the table that will help bring sides together so that we can have a more effective working legislative body?
Well, it's unfortunate that those walkouts happened, but because they have a supermajority, according to Robert's Rules of Order, that's the only tool that we have right now. If they would stop with the far left legislation and just sit down and have a level head, the walkouts would stop. But right now, that's the only tool that we have as a party because we're severely outnumbered. But as far as regular legislation, I can talk to people. That's, I'm in sales, Dan. That's what I do. I know how to talk to people. I know how to negotiate. But the cap and tax scam that they were trying to pass, that's the only tool that we had. It's unfortunate, but they put us in that position.
So I want to ask you guys about the pandemic. One of the questions that Governor Brown and other governors around the country are facing is how do you reopen the state for business? How and when, and what are the criteria? Dan, you want to take a whack at that first? What your thoughts are? How you think we ought to be going about it?
Yeah, I think that's, it's pretty speculative at this point. We don't really know enough yet to say what the future is going to hold. Right now we're still in the discovery and finger pointing phase, frankly. I think there's the plan to open up regionally. That makes sense. There's no one size fits all. If you're in a dense city, if you're riding around buses and trains, a little different than out in the countryside, of course. So I think we maybe overreacted a bit, but I don't know that anybody had a choice. Going forward, we need to find a way out of this, and we can't go on like this. That's a fact. It simply isn't sustainable. So I think regionally, we're going to have to start in. Testing, of course, is still a ways off, and having vaccines, that's even further off. So that's not a real option for the immediate future. But the regional approach and step by step and organization by organization, we're going to have to get back to work.
Okay. Larry, same question. What about opening the state back up?
Well, I don't know if you had a chance to read her 25-page plan. I did. And if you read between the lines, we're not looking until the end of May before we reopen. And that's just simply unsustainable, especially in rural Oregon, where I was in Wasco County last week. And I looked, there are 5 hospitalizations and no deaths. So I'm just wondering why they're keeping it shut down in rural Oregon. Why, because those businesses, they depend upon tourism, which they're not going to get. So the only way they're going to make up their revenue is locals. But right now, they don't have that revenue stream. As far as her plan right now, her plan's based on the IHME model. And I just have zero confidence in it right now. I don't know if you had a chance to read some of the writings by Dr. Ian Adonis from Stanford, but he says that our current approach is destructive, and it's not going to do anything to solve what we're dealing with. So my thought is, let's get away from a containment strategy and switch over to a mitigation strategy.
Okay.
Hey, can I, Larry?
Yeah.
I know that you and Dan probably have very little in common with Kate Brown in terms of your political views. Not surprised to hear that. I'm a little bit surprised that on your website you call the governor corrupt.
She is.
So can you talk a little bit about her corruption?
Look at the state employment side. They gave the state $86 million in 2009. Who was the Secretary of State then? That would be none other than Kay Brown. I'm just wondering why a project that should take 2 years is not going to be deployed until 2025. A lot of these modules to build these systems, you can pull them right off the internet. I looked last night. They didn't even start until 2016, but yet they're not going to even have it deployed until 2025.
So Larry,
Yeah.
the definition of corrupt is doing something dishonest for personal financial gain.
Oh, you mean like telling the spokesman, I can't remember her name, in charge of public records requests that you work for me, not the people. That would be corrupt.
Okay, thank you.
Dan, I want to come back to a question about the district, since you've lived there for 20 years, and it's changed a little bit. But as I pointed out earlier in the conversation, the district is extremely balanced. There's every reason to think a Republican could find the votes to win back this seat. I think a lot of people were surprised that Courtney Naron won it in 2018. So help us out there. What is the mood in your district, and what is the opportunity for a Republican to take the seat back in November?
We haven't done recent polling in that sense, so I can't tell you what the actual current mood is, say, but this district has leaned conservative for the 20 years. The registrations have been growing on the Democratic side, but you're right, we have maybe 15,000 Republicans and closer to 16 in the Democrats and maybe 16 plus in the non-affiliated. So it is split, if you will. In the 2018 election, she won by basically the difference in registrations. The non-affiliated voters turned out about 50%, and they split literally right down the middle, 4,000 votes each. Now, in the past, that hasn't been the case. So that was the swing. Several thousand votes on the non-affiliated side swung to the Democratic Party. I think for the most part, it was lack of confidence in the current representative. It's why I got into the race. You saw, as I said, I got 30% of the vote coming from nowhere with no money. So I think the district still leans to the right. I think we've seen that Courtney Naron immediately aligned herself, voting more than 99% of the time with Speaker Kotek. We're still represented by a Republican in the Senate. So I have every reason to believe that we can find the non-affiliated voters that will swing the votes back to the conservative side.
So what's the message that's going to resonate with those voters? What is the issue or the argument that you can make that will convince people that the seat should go back to your party?
Well, again, we started off the interview talking about the lack of respect for voters. So I think that's number one on the hit parade. Number two is the competence. I think I bring a set of skills to the table that are sorely lacking in Salem. Again, the alignment with Portland, that's not what the district wants. If we've leaned conservative for 20 years, the day you get elected, again, you're 99% aligned with a far left liberal leader in Portland. That's clearly not representing the district. So that's the message. I think it'll resonate.
Larry, you're running against a guy who's run now. This is his third time through the mill. So why would I, if I were a Republican voter in District 26, why would I vote for you instead of Dan?
Well, it's just I think what you just mentioned right there. People do see that, and that's actually a negative. If you've ran and this is the third time around and you've lost, people are going to look at that. It's easy to find.
Okay. Anything else?
Other than that, no. Him and I are on the same page.
Okay. Mark, you had something you wanted to ask?
Oh, I'm good.
Any other questions for our candidates? Nope. Okay. So, guys, we're asking everybody the same question at the end of the interview. The question, since we're in this unusual pandemic, is what will you remember? What personal experience have you had, or what have you gone through, or what have you done in these last 4 or 5 weeks that you always remember when you think back to the pandemic of 2020? Larry, you go first, please.
Learning how to campaign is like drinking out of a fire hose. That's what I'll definitely remember. It's a lot different. You have to take time away from your family, which is hard. Maybe you can't go fishing with your buddy because you're busy doing things for the campaign. But it was an awesome experience.
Okay. Dan, how about you?
In terms of the pandemic affecting my life, it hasn't been much of a change in terms of personal routine. I've been self-employed, working out of my home for a number of years. But I think what I'm going to take from it and remember is the things that people have lost, the opportunities. So whether it's a student graduation, my daughter is currently studying to be a PhD, get her PhD in bioengineering, or my son whose plan a wedding is likely going to have to cancel that. So to me, it's the loss of opportunity and those kind of personal impacts that I'll remember.
Okay, great. Well, gentlemen, thank you both for making the time for us today. We really appreciate it. This video will go up likely on Wednesday when our endorsement issue comes out.
All right. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Okay.
Stay healthy.
Bye.
Bye.